Dear students, welcome to this lecture. Today's topic for discussion is confidence building measures to understand one of the ways of conflict resolution among states. The main objectives of today's lecture are to understand the meaning of the concept of confidence building measures, to know main approach of confidence building measures, to have a look on the confidence building measures between India and Pakistan, to have a look on confidence building measures between India and China, and finally to have a look on confidence building measures in the Middle East. Dear students, first let's start with introduction. Confidence building measures, known also as CBMs, are broadly defined as measures that address, prevent, or resolve uncertainties among states. Designed to prevent wanted and especially unwanted escalations of hostilities and build mutual trust, CBMs can be formal, informal, unilateral, bilateral, or multilateral, military or political, and can be state to state or non-governmental. They are particularly pertinent in addressing and working towards the resolution of long-term political stalemates. First conceived of in the context of European conflict management in 1970s, the concept of CBMs include military, cultural and social exchange and has been applied to conflicts throughout the world, particularly in Asia. CBMs are flexible enough to be adapted to specific regional security environments, yet similar enough in concepts so that worldwide regions can learn from one another's experience. The experiences of CBMs in one region can stimulate problem-solving approach in other regions. But there are limits on transplanting an experience from one region to another. CBMs cannot be transposed wholesale from one region to another. Each region has its own unique culture and history. Dear students, let's have a look now on the approach of confidence building measures. Dozens of successful confidence building measures have been applied throughout the world. Approaches vary in general, but there are four main areas: communication, constraint, transparency, and verification. So let's see first communication. Communication channels between conflict-prone states help to diffuse tensions during the moments of crisis or provide a more regular consultative mechanism. A prime example is the hotline that was established between national command authorities in Washington and Moscow after the Cuban Missile Crisis. Number second, constant measures. Constant measures are designed to keep certain types and levels of states' military forces at distance from one another, especially along borders. These measures could include the advance notice of troop movement above a pre-agreed level or placing constraints on the military exercise. Limited force deployment zones or thin-out zones also restrict the type and number of military equipment or troops permitted in or near a certain territory or border. An example of this constraint was former President George Bush's decision to withdraw deployed ground, air and sea-launched tactical nuclear weapon overseas in the fall of 1991. Third, transparency. Transparency measures foster greater openness of military capabilities and activities. Such measures may include pre-notification requirements, data exchange, and voluntary observations of one another's states' military exercise and operating procedures. Nuclear transparency measures also include unilateral declarations of nuclear-related data or exchange of such data among parties. Decision by United States and United Kingdom to declassify information about their military fissile material stocks are example of unilateral transparency measures aimed at bringing confidence building. Last, verification. Verification measures are designed to confirm or verify the state's compliance with a particular treaty or agreement. These can include aerial inspections, ground-based electronic censoring systems, and on-site inspections. Aerial inspections enable parties to monitor compliance with force deployment limitations in restricted zones, to confirm data exchange, and to provide early warning of potentially destabilizing activities. On-site inspections, in particular, can help verify that states are complying with agreements. Inspections may be carried out by third parties, opposing parties, or jointly. Let's see first now confidence building measures between India and Pakistan. The initiatives discussed and implemented in South Asia offer sobering insights for other regions. India and Pakistan are nuclear powers with a history of conflict. Their history is interspersed with war, conflicts on issues of bilateral importance, and a simmering territorial dispute over Kashmir. These conflicts have created a situation where each country expects the worst of the other. The South Asian environment is a crisis-prone region, and consequently, averting another war is essential, particularly one that could escalate to a nuclear exchange. In an ideal situation, India and Pakistan would develop stabilizing measures to address the variety of nuclear-related issues between them. These include preventive measures to minimize conflict escalation, measures to assist in crisis management at times when tensions are heightened and perhaps when conventional conflict is already in progress, and measures to manage de-escalation and bring the regional parties back from the brink of nuclear conflict. India and Pakistan have developed CBM-like structures and agreements since the country's independence. Since then, most of CBMs now in place were prompted by the wars in 1947-48, 1965 and 1971, and by periods of high tension associated with military exercise conducted between 1986 and 1991. The first observation about India-Pakistan relationship and their attempts to ease tension is that parties have been more reactive than proactive in seeing that conflict does not break out again. A lesson is that CBMs cannot be forced upon parties that are still infused with such raw emotion and mistrust. The first nuclear CBM was the Prohibition of Attack Against Nuclear Facilities, which was signed by Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi and Pakistani Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto on December 31, 1988. It was ratified in 1991 and implemented in January 1992. The bilateral agreement prohibits attack directly or indirectly against nuclear installations or facilities in either country. In an effort to be more transparent, the agreement also requires an annual exchange of lists detailing the location of all nuclear facilities in each country. Lists of facilities covered by this agreement are now exchanged periodically, but often have not been wholly accepted by either side. Over the years, both countries have made their own separate initiatives to decrease tension. At times, Pakistan has proposed bilateral nuclear arms control measures with India, declaring, for example, that it would be prepared to join NPT or accept other non-proliferation measures if India did so. But India has rejected these proposals, arguing that they do not address the nuclear threat India faces from China and that nuclear disarmament questions should be addressed at global rather than regional issues. India released its draft nuclear doctrine in August 1999. The document states that, in view of the very high destructive potential of nuclear weapons, appropriate nuclear risk reduction and confidence building measures shall be sought, negotiated, and maintained. Pakistan has yet to formalize its own nuclear doctrine or respond to India's offer. India's doctrine also intends to abide by the no first use nuclear weapons. India states the fundamental purpose of its nuclear weapons is to deter the use and threat of use of nuclear weapons by any state or entity against India and its forces. India will not be the first to initiate a nuclear strike, but will respond with punitive retaliation should deterrence fail. Pakistan has yet to issue a similar no first use declaration, and based on its smaller conventional forces compared to India, is unlikely to do so. Currently, both India and Pakistan are voluntarily maintaining a moratorium on further nuclear testing. Sustaining such moratorium helps limit the expansion of nuclear weapon capabilities in the region. These unilateral commitments illustrate one of the highlights of CBMs, in that CBMs are often easier to achieve than formal arms control agreements. CBMs are flexible enough that they can be tacit and informal, such as India and Pakistan's general understanding about testing, or quite specific, such as the prohibition of attack against nuclear facilities. After the 1998 nuclear tests, India and Pakistan had to confront more openly the reality of their now nuclearized neighborhood. In February 1999, India's Prime Minister Vajpayee and Pakistan's Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif met in Lahore, Pakistan, and agreed to a joint statement by Prime Ministers, a Memorandum of Understanding by the Foreign Secretaries, and the Lahore Declaration itself, again made by the Prime Ministers. The nuclear concerns identified in the Lahore documents are nuclear safety, security, use, control, limits on the threat, and alert status. A series of CBMs were proposed to address these concerns. In the ministerial statement, the Prime Ministers recognized that the nuclear dimension of the security environment of two countries added to their responsibility of the avoidance of conflict between the two countries. The text of the MoU concerned the terms of nuclear risk reduction. It emphasized measures to improve nuclear security and prevent an accidental nuclear exchange. One of the measures sought to prevent the accidental or unauthorized use of nuclear weapons. Another called for creation of communication mechanisms similar to some aspects to those required by the Convention on Early Notification of Nuclear Accident. Specifically, the two sides committed to exchange information of their nuclear doctrines and security concepts, prevent accidental nuclear crises, work on measures to improve control over their nuclear weapons, review existing CBMs and emergency communication arrangements with a view to upgrading and improving their links, and strengthen India and Pakistan's unilateral moratoriums on nuclear testing by making their commitments binding unless either side decides that extraordinary events have jeopardized its supreme interests. But just 3 months later, fighting broke out over Kargil, and the technical details to the Lahore document were never worked out. As is often the case between India and Pakistan, implementing the agreements suffered setbacks and became hostage to political tensions over territory. This absence of trust and confidence among the leaders of India and Pakistan, as evident during the Kargil crisis of May-July 1999, is a major cause of tension in South Asia and undermines the significance of CBMs agreed to be by New Delhi and Islamabad. Until the details are finalized and pledges made at Lahore are implemented, nuclear risk reduction in South Asia will remain rhetorical. An important lesson is that the emphasis of Indian and Pakistani leaders on declaratory measures is not that productive in an atmosphere devoid of trust. As mentioned earlier, improving mutual confidence and trust in a political domain is the first order of business for creating effective CBMs. Thus, establishing even a modicum of trust is necessary in order to stabilize their adversarial relations. The two countries must rethink the process of CBM measures as necessary for the resolution of their conflicts. Dear students, let's have a look now on CBMs between India and China. Since India's independence, its relation with China have been complicated by a long and undemarcated border, indeed the longest contested land frontier in the world. The length of the border itself is disputed. India claims it 3,488 kilometers, while for China it is shorter, only 2,000 kilometers. The border dispute led to war in 1962, which lasted for about a month and resulted in 8,000 deaths for India and 2,000 for China, following which there was a hiatus in bilateral relationship for over 10 years. In 1976, then Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi agreed to exchange ambassadors with China. Then Foreign Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee visited China in February in 1979. And shortly after, the two sides began border talks, which would see 8 rounds between 1981 and 1988. A milestone happened in 1988 when then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi held a summit with counterpart Deng Xiaoping, the first such meeting between leaders of two countries since 1960s. The summit led to a series of agreements and CBMs between two countries which have impacted norm implementation and norm compliance to a certain extent. While the diplomatic ties, including CBMs, have helped prevent severe conflict, the lack of border settlement traps Sino-India relationships in seemingly endless seesaw. A permanent settlement of the border is vital for long-term peace and stability. The norm of territorial integrity has been implemented through references in 3 key agreements signed between the two countries between 1993 and 2005. These agreements also contain provisions to enforce their norm through several CBMs that have largely been compiled with notwithstanding recent border confrontations. Starting with the 1993 Agreement on Peace and Tranquility along the border, several Sino-Indian deals have sought to uphold the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity and maintain peace along the border, even as the border demarcation issue itself had not been settled. India and China agreed that the border issue would not be settled by force. A 1996 agreement on confidence-building measures reinforced these principles and outlined a number of CBMs on constraint and transparency. These included limitations of military armament through mutual and equal security, refraining from conducting large-scale military exercises along the LAC, and the prevention of dangerous military activities, including opening fire with 2 kilometers of LAC. The 2005 protocol built on the 1996 agreement and laid out standard operating procedures for implementation of previous agreements. Some years later, in 2013, the Border Defense Cooperation Agreement was signed after the Depsang face-off and reiterated the commitment to not use force and accepted the principle of mutual equality and security. There is a correlation between CBMs and norm implementation since the resumption of diplomatic relations in 1976. Communication CBMs have resulted in agreements that both continue to acknowledge in their bilateral relations. Further, They have devised measures for the enforcement of territorial integrity between the two states. For example, the Joint Working Group, set up in 1988, laid the groundwork for agreements signed between India in 1993 and 1996, both of which incorporated the principle of territorial integrity and enforced mechanisms to preserve the same. Since 1988, CBMs have had a positive impact on norm compliance as well. Since the resumption of diplomatic relations between the two countries in 1976 till the Galwan Valley clash in 2020, both countries have largely complied with the norm of territorial integrity and sovereignty along the line of actual control. While there have been face-offs between armies along the undemarcated border, these have usually not resulted into casualties or clashes and have been resolved through the standard operating procedures, including through communication and constraint CBMs in the place. Throughout the Joint Working Group meetings from 1988 to 2003, there was agreement that peace and tranquility along the border would not be contingent on the framework that determined the precise alignment of the LAC. The 2005 and 2013 agreements have incorporated communication and constraint CBMs which prevented face-off from causing casualties. Further, states have underscored existing constraint CBMs in order to prevent the escalation of low-scale territorial conflict into a limited border war or all-out conflict. For example, in the aftermath of Galwan Valley clash, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar emphasized the compliance of Indian soldiers with 1996 constraint CBMs between India and China, which stated, I quote, "Neither side shall open fire or hunt with guns or explosives within 2 kilometers from the line of actual control," unquote. Despite hostility on the border following the Galwan clashes between two countries, have upheld the communication CBMs through both diplomatic and military talks. There have been no further casualties since then. There have now been 11 rounds of Corps Commander level talks aiming for the disengagement of the troops from remaining friction points in the sector. Dear students, let's have a look now some of the CBMs that happened in the region of Middle East. In the aftermath of the Persian Gulf War, participants in the Middle East peace process gathered together in October 1991 in Madrid. 5 multilateral groups were formed shortly after the opening round, focusing on an array of issues from refugees to environment. The only group devoted exclusively to security issues was the Arms Control and Regional Security Working Group. The purpose of ACRS was to apply confidence-building measures to the region and broadly discuss a nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction-free zone. Chaired by the United States and Russia, early ACRS sessions sought to build knowledge of CBMs among the regional participants. Until mid-1993, the working group focused primarily on familiarizing the regional parties with arms control and with one another. The parties were presented with explanations of histories and provisions of arms control agreements implemented in the Middle East and in other regions. Expert-level meetings focused principally on CBM discussions in 5 areas: declaratory measures, communications, maritime agreements, military information exchange, and conflict prevention in regional security. There were a number of special site visits as well. In October 1994, several parties visited a German nuclear plant and discussed the interaction between the IAEA and its Regional Verification Authority, Euratom. Parties also toured a Swiss chemical weapon verification laboratory and Finnish chemical weapon verification related training facility, as a party of workshop on the implementation of Chemical Weapons Convention. As parties came to articulate their concerns, the nuclear asymmetry of region proved to be a focal point. A wide gap between Israeli and Arab priorities on arms control emerged. Israel proposed that the first steps towards armed control consists of transparency CBMs, while Egypt suggests that all parties in the region first sign existing nuclear, chemical and biological weapon treaties and allow international inspections. Israel maintained that CBMs were a prerequisite to any steps towards denuclearization. Thereafter, Egypt and Israel remained at loggerheads in the ACRS talks about how best to initiate a process of confidence building in the region. Egypt and Israel also differ in their requirements for a future nuclear weapons free zone in the region. Israel does not have confidence in IAEA safeguards provided under the NPT and insists upon a tight and complementary regional verification regime, whereas Egypt maintains that existing IAEA regime is sufficient. Because of the fundamental clash between Israel and Egypt, ACRS has not held a formal plenary meeting since September 1995. Still, the group continues to pursue informal activities and many regional parties attended track 2 events as well. So, dear students, this was all about today's lecture on confidence building measures, various approaches and the cases of confidence building measures between India and Pakistan, India and China and the Middle East. I hope you have enjoyed the lecture. Thank you.